At 75, her son took everything, but her dog refused to leave one spot in a house no one wanted. The morning they handed her the papers, Eleanor didn't argue. She just stood there, listening as her life was quietly signed away at her own kitchen table. By sunset, she was driving north with a dog who wouldn't sit, toward a cottage no one had cared about in decades, except him. And the moment they stepped inside, he started looking for something she didn't even know was missing. Have you ever had a feeling something wasn't right, even when everyone else said it was? Eleanor Whitaker woke before the house did. That had always been her habit. Even now, at 75, her body rose with the faint gray of early morning, as if something inside her still believed there was work waiting. The room was unfamiliar in a quiet way. Not wrong, just not hers. The dresser wasn't where she would have put it. The curtains were heavier than she liked. Even the air felt different, too still, too sealed off from the world. Her son had installed new windows last year. Energy efficient, he'd said. Keeps the cold out. It kept everything out. Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, letting her feet find the floor. The carpet was soft, newer than the rest of the house. She had watched them replace it, had stood in the hallway with her hands folded, listening to the men measure and cut and staple something permanent into a place that had never really belonged to her. Across the room, Coda lifted his head. He had been awake longer than she had. The German shepherd didn't move right away, just watched her, ears forward, eyes steady. There was something in the way he held himself, alert, quiet, waiting. "You're up early," she murmured. He stood then, slow and deliberate, and crossed the room to her side. His shoulder brushed her leg as if to check she was still there, still real. "I'm not going anywhere," she said softly, reaching down to touch the thick fur behind his ears. But her voice didn't sound convincing, even to her. The kitchen light flicked on with a soft click. Eleanor moved through the house the way she always did, careful, quiet, making as little noise as possible. It wasn't something anyone had asked of her. It was just how things had settled. The kitchen smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and something sweet from the night before. Her daughter-in-law had baked. There was a plate of cookies on the counter, neatly covered, as if arranged for someone else. Eleanor stood there for a moment, looking at them. Then she turned away. She filled the kettle. The tap water ran colder than she expected, biting against her fingers. She waited for it to warm, but it never quite did. The pipes in this house had a way of holding on to the night. Coda didn't lie down. He stayed near the doorway, watching the front hall, watching something she couldn't see. "You're acting strange," she said, glancing back at him. His ears twitched. His gaze didn't shift. The kettle began to hum, low and steady. Eleanor reached for the cupboard, pulling down a single mug. It wasn't her favorite. She didn't have a favorite here. She spooned in coffee grounds, not the brand she used to buy. This one was stronger, sharper. Her son liked it that way. She poured the water slowly, watching the dark bloom rise and settle. It was a small thing, a morning routine, but her hands moved carefully, as if the shape of it still mattered. Outside, the sky was pale, the kind of Colorado morning that felt clean but distant, like something you could see but not quite step into. She carried the mug to the table and sat down. For a moment, it was quiet. Then Coda stood up straighter. His body shifted. Not tense exactly. Just ready. Eleanor noticed it this time. "What is it?" she asked. Before he could answer, before anything could settle, the front door opened. Voices. low at first, then clearer. Her son's voice came in ahead of him, steady, measured, the same tone he used on the phone when talking to clients. Calm, controlled. Just inside, he was saying. Footsteps followed. Not one set. 3. Eleanor set her mug down slowly. Coda moved closer to her chair, not touching, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. Her son stepped into the kitchen. Daniel Whitaker, 62 now, taller than she remembered him being when he was younger. Thinner, too. His hair had gone gray at the temples, but he kept it cut neat. Clean lines, clean edges. Everything about him seemed arranged. He didn't smile. Behind him stood a woman Eleanor had never seen before. Mid-40s, maybe. Dark coat, leather folder tucked under her arm. She had the look of someone who spent her life walking into rooms where she didn't belong and making it feel like she did. Another man hovered near the doorway, younger, avoiding eye contact. "Mom," Daniel said. Just that. No good morning, no explanation. Eleanor nodded once. "You're up early." He stepped further into the room, gesturing toward the table. "We need to talk." Coda shifted. A low sound started in his chest. Not loud, not aggressive, just enough to be heard. Daniel glanced at the dog, then away again. "It's fine," he said, more to the room than to her. The woman moved forward and placed the leather folder on the table. She opened it with practiced hands. Papers slid out. Crisp, prepared. Eleanor didn't touch them. She looked at her son instead. "What is this?" Daniel exhaled, slow, like he had already said this somewhere else. Practiced it. "It's just paperwork," he said. "We've been going over some things, making sure everything's in order." "In order," she repeated. The woman began arranging the pages, straightening edges that didn't need straightening. "This won't take long, Mrs. Whitaker," she said gently. "We just need to walk you through." Eleanor didn't hear the rest. Something in the room had shifted. Not the light, not the sound. Something else. She looked down at the papers. Her name was there, printed, typed, signed in places she didn't remember signing. A date from months ago. Hospital. She remembered that day. The bright lights, the way everything had felt rushed, the way Daniel had said, "Just sign here, Mom. It's temporary. Just so I can help, temporary." Her eyes moved across the lines. Ownership, transfer, authorization. Words stacked on top of each other, clean and official and final. She felt her fingers tighten around the edge of the table. No one spoke for a moment. The kettle clicked softly as it cooled behind her. Coda let out another low sound. Eleanor looked up. At her son. He wasn't looking at her. That was the first thing that settled it. Not the papers, not the woman, not the words. It was that. He wasn't looking at her. And suddenly, with a clarity that came too fast, too clean, she understood. This wasn't a conversation. This wasn't a discussion. She wasn't being asked to move. She had already been moved. Replaced. The chair across from her wasn't empty anymore. It just hadn't been filled yet. Eleanor sat very still. The room felt smaller now, tighter, as if the walls had leaned in while she wasn't paying attention. Her coffee sat untouched in front of her, the surface already cooling, already losing its heat. Coda stepped closer, pressing lightly against her leg. She placed her hand on his head. And for the first time that morning, she didn't say anything at all. The silence held longer than it should have. The woman across from her cleared her throat softly, as if silence were something to be managed. "Mrs. Whitaker," she said, her voice measured, almost kind. "If you'd like, I can walk you through each section." Eleanor didn't look at her. Her eyes stayed on the papers. Her name appeared again and again, printed neatly, repeated in places that felt unfamiliar. There were signatures, hers apparently, but they didn't feel like they belonged to her hands. The ink looked thinner than she remembered, lighter, like something written in a hurry. "When did I sign these?" she asked. Her voice came out calm, too calm. Daniel shifted his weight, just slightly. "It was back in March," he said, "when you were in the hospital. You remember, Mom? You had that fall." Eleanor remembered the fall, the hard edge of the kitchen counter catching her hip, the way the floor had risen faster than she expected, the bright lights afterward, the smell of antiseptic, the doctor speaking quickly, using words she didn't quite follow. She remembered Daniel standing beside the bed. He had been patient then, gentle. "Just sign here," he had said. "It's temporary, just so I can handle things while you recover." Temporary. She lifted one page carefully, as if it might tear if she moved too quickly. "This says transfer of authority," she said. "It's standard language," the woman replied smoothly. "Nothing unusual. It simply allowed your son to act on your behalf." Eleanor turned another page. "Then why does it say irrevocable?" The room shifted again, not visibly, not loudly. But something tightened. Daniel stepped forward now, placing his hand lightly on the back of a chair. Not sitting, just grounding himself. "Mom, you're focusing on the wording," he said. "These things always sound more complicated than they are." Eleanor looked up at him then. Really looked. He still wasn't meeting her eyes. Instead, he looked just past her shoulder, like there was something more important happening behind her. "What does it do?" she asked. Her voice was still quiet, but it had changed. The woman answered this time. "It transfers management of the property and financial accounts," she said. "Given your age and the medical concerns at the time, your son was designated as the primary decision-maker." "Primary," Eleanor repeated. "Yes." "And me?" A pause. "You retain limited access," the woman said carefully. "Of course, limited." Eleanor let the words settle. She picked up another page. This one had a different heading. Deed adjustment. Her fingers stopped moving. "The house," she said. Daniel inhaled slowly. "It made sense," he said, "given everything. The maintenance, the costs." "The house," she said again, louder this time. Not angry, just clearer. He nodded, yes. Eleanor looked around the kitchen. The cabinets, the counter, the plate of cookies still sitting untouched. She had lived here 3 years, 3 winters, 3 summers. She had learned which step creaked near the hallway. She knew how the sunlight fell across the table in the late afternoon. She had thought she was part of it. "When did that happen?" she asked. "Mom, when did that happen, Daniel?" He hesitated. "About 6 weeks ago." 6 weeks. She thought of the mornings she had sat at this table, the evenings she had washed dishes after everyone else had gone upstairs, the quiet hours she had folded laundry that wasn't hers. 6 weeks. And no one had said anything. Coda shifted again. He stepped forward this time, placing himself slightly in front of her chair, not blocking, not aggressive, just there. The younger man by the doorway finally spoke. Maybe we should. Daniel raised a hand slightly. The man fell silent. It's not what you think, Daniel said. Eleanor almost smiled at that, almost. Then tell me what it is, she said. He rubbed his hands together once. It's about stability, he said. About making sure everything is handled properly. You've been having trouble. I have not, she said. Her voice didn't rise, but it didn't bend either. A long moment passed. Daniel exhaled. You fell, he said. You forget things sometimes. We had to make sure you were protected. Protected. Eleanor looked down at the papers again. Protected people weren't surprised like this. Protected people didn't sit at their own kitchen table and discover they no longer had a place in it. What happens now? She asked. The woman answered. There are arrangements, she said. A living situation has been prepared. Temporary housing, with the option for long-term care if needed. Eleanor felt something shift inside her. Not outwardly. Not in a way anyone else could see. But something moved. Like a door closing quietly in a room she hadn't realized was still open. I see, she said. She set the papers down. Carefully. Her hands were steady. Too steady. Daniel seemed to relax slightly, as if he had been waiting for something louder. Something harder. This is the best option, he said. For everyone. Eleanor nodded once. For everyone, she repeated. Coda let out a low breath. Not a growl this time, just a sound. Eleanor placed her hand on his head again, feeling the warmth of him, the solid weight of something that hadn't shifted. Not yet. She looked back at the table, at the papers, at the neat arrangement of decisions made without her. And then she looked at her son. This time he met her eyes. Just for a second. Long enough. Whatever he saw there made him look away again. Eleanor didn't say anything else. There was nothing left to ask. Nothing left to clarify. The room felt settled now. Final. Like something had already happened, and this was just the moment she had caught up to it. She reached for her coffee, took a small sip. It had gone cold. She drank it anyway, and set the cup back down exactly where it had been. No one spoke, not for a long time. The silence stretched until it felt like part of the room. Eleanor sat with her hands folded in her lap, the papers still lying in front of her, edges squared too neatly. The woman across from her had stopped rearranging them. Daniel had stepped back, as if giving her space would make the moment easier to carry. It didn't. Coda stayed where he was, close enough that she could feel the steady warmth of his body against her leg. Every now and then, his ears twitched toward the hallway, toward the sound of movement deeper in the house. The moving crew. She hadn't noticed when they came in. Now she could hear them. Soft footsteps. The scrape of something being lifted. A drawer opening somewhere down the hall. Eleanor stood. The chair moved back with a faint sound against the floor. No one tried to stop her. Daniel said her name once. Mom. She didn't answer. She walked past him, past the table, past the careful arrangement of papers that had already decided everything. Her room was at the end of the hallway. It wasn't really her room. It had never been called that. It was the spare, even after 3 years. Even after her clothes filled the closet and her books lined the small shelf by the window. The door was open. One of the men stood inside, holding a folded sweater that didn't belong to him. He turned when he saw her. Sorry, he said quickly. We were told to. Eleanor stepped into the room. That's fine, she said. Her voice was even. The man hesitated, then set the sweater down on the bed. He moved past her without another word. Coda followed her in, brushing against her side as he entered. He gave the empty hallway one last look before settling near the door, watching. Eleanor closed the door halfway. Not all the way. Just enough. She stood in the middle of the room for a moment. Then she began. She didn't rush. There was no point in rushing. She opened the closet and took out 2 suitcases, old ones, the kind with worn handles and a faint smell of cedar that never quite faded. They had been hers for years, longer than anything else in this house. She placed them on the bed. Clothes first. Simple things. Sweaters, a coat, a pair of shoes she knew she could walk in. She folded each item carefully, smoothing the fabric with her hands before placing it inside. Coda moved once, circling the room, then settled again near the door, watching. Every so often, footsteps passed in the hallway. Voices, low and polite. The soft rhythm of a house being rearranged around her. Eleanor didn't look up. She opened the dresser. Inside, near the back, was a small tin, faded blue with a dent along one corner, her sewing tin. She picked it up and held it for a moment. The metal was cool in her hands. She placed it gently in the suitcase. Next came the photograph. It was tucked into the back of the drawer, beneath a stack of handkerchiefs she hadn't used in years. The edges were worn soft. The image faded just enough to blur the details if you didn't look closely. Her grandmother stood in front of a small wooden house, one hand resting on the railing of a porch that leaned slightly to the left. The sky behind her was wide and empty. Eleanor traced the edge of the photograph with her thumb. Then she placed it nigh the suitcase between 2 sweaters, where it wouldn't bend. She paused then, just for a moment. Her eyes moved around the room. The bed, the window, the chair in the corner that had never quite been comfortable. 3 years. It didn't look like anything had happened here. Coda stood suddenly. His body shifted, weight forward, ears sharp. Footsteps approached the door. 2 of the men entered without knocking. "Ma'am," one of them said, "we'll need to—" He stopped. Coda had moved between them and the bed. Not lunging, not barking, just standing. Still. The space between them was small, but it felt like a wall. Eleanor looked at the dog. "Coda," she said quietly. He didn't move. His eyes stayed on the men. They hesitated. "We're just here to help," the second man said, raising his hand slightly, as if calming something larger than a dog. Eleanor stepped forward. "It's all right," she said. "I've got it." Coda glanced at her then. Just for a second. Then he stepped back, returning to her side, though his gaze didn't leave the doorway. The men nodded quickly and left. The door remained open behind them. Eleanor closed the suitcases. The latches clicked into place with a soft, final sound. She lifted one, then the other. They were heavier than she expected, or maybe she was lighter. She wasn't sure. When she stepped back into the hallway, everything felt brighter. Too bright. Daniel stood near the kitchen, the woman beside him, the papers now gathered neatly back into the folder. He opened his mouth. Eleanor walked past him. She didn't stop. The front door stood open. Cold air moved through the space, carrying the faint smell of dry leaves and distant asphalt. Outside, the driveway stretched clean and empty beneath a pale sky. Her car sat where she had left it. 10 years old, faded paint, still hers. For now, she set the suitcases down beside it, opened the trunk, and placed them inside with care. Coda jumped in without being asked, settling into the back seat, but not lying down. His head stayed up, eyes scanning the house, the yard, the open door. Eleanor closed the trunk. She stood there for a moment. The house behind her was quiet again. No voices now, just the wind moving lightly across the edges of the roof. She walked back inside. Just once. The kitchen looked the same. The mug she had used that morning still sat on the table, half empty, a thin film cooling across the surface. Eleanor picked it up, carried it to the sink. She turned on the water. It ran cold at first, then warmer. She rinsed the cup slowly, watching the last of the coffee spiral away. Her hands moved with the same care they had always had, as if this small act still mattered. She set the mug upside down on the rack. Water dripped once, then again. Behind her, she could feel them watching. She dried her hands on a towel hanging from the oven handle. Then she turned. Daniel stood there, waiting. Eleanor looked at him. Really looked this time. At the lines around his mouth, the way his shoulders held themselves, the space between them that hadn't been there once. She didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. She walked past him. Out the front door. The air outside felt sharper now. Colder, but clearer. She got into the driver's seat. The engine turned over on the second try. Coda shifted in the back, settling into place. Eleanor adjusted the mirror. For a moment, the house filled the frame behind her. Large, still, already distant. She lowered the mirror slightly, so she wouldn't have to see it. Then she put the car in drive and pulled away without looking back. The tires rolled over the smooth pavement of the driveway, then onto the quiet suburban street. The house disappeared from view before she reached the corner. Eleanor didn't check the mirror. Not once. The morning traffic had already begun to build, thin streams of cars moving with purpose toward places that still belonged to them. She eased into it, careful, steady, her hands firm on the wheel. Coda didn't lie down. He stood in the back seat, paws braced, body angled slightly forward, as if he were trying to see beyond the windshield. His eyes moved constantly, side to side, then forward again. Watching. Always watching. "You can sit," Eleanor said quietly. He didn't. She let it go. The road out of the neighborhood curved past a row of identical houses, each one trimmed and quiet, each one holding a version of a life that no longer included her. Lawns cut short, mailboxes upright, curtains drawn just enough to keep the inside private. She passed them all. At the main road, she paused for a moment before turning. Left would take her back into town. Right would take her north. She turned right. The car picked up speed as the road widened, the buildings thinning out into stretches of open land. The sky grew larger there, less crowded by rooftops and wires. Eleanor kept her eyes forward. She didn't think about where she might stop, didn't think about what came next. There was only one direction. North. The first hour passed in silence. The hum of the engine settled into a steady rhythm. The tires whispered against the road. A faint rattle from somewhere in the dashboard reminded her how old the car really was. She didn't turn on the radio. The quiet felt cleaner without it. Coda shifted once, then again. He moved from one side of the back seat to the other, adjusting his stance, nose lifting slightly, as if catching something in the air. "There's nothing there," Eleanor said, more to fill the space than to correct him, but he kept watching. They crossed out of the city limits without ceremony. No sign, she noticed. Just a gradual thinning. Fewer houses, longer stretches between them. Fences that leaned instead of standing straight. The land opened. Dry grass first, then patches of trees, the kind that grew uneven, shaped more by wind than intention. Eleanor loosened her grip on the wheel slightly. Her shoulders dropped a fraction. She hadn't realized how tight she'd been holding herself until now. By the second hour, the road narrowed. 2 lanes instead of 4, then 1 in each direction, separated by a faded yellow line that flickered in and out of clarity. The air changed. She cracked the window just a little. Cold air slipped in, sharp and clean. It carried the faint smell of pine, of earth that hadn't been paved over. She closed her eyes for half a second, then opened them again. The road curved gently, rising and falling with the shape of the land. A distant ridge came into view, its outline softened by haze. Coda leaned forward slightly, not tense, just attentive, as if he recognized something she didn't. "You've never been there," she said softly. But even as she said it, she wasn't sure. He had been with her for 7 years. There were things before that she didn't know. The third hour came slower, not because the road changed, but because her thoughts did. They began to move again. Quietly at first, then louder. The kitchen table, the papers, Daniel's voice, steady, controlled, the woman's careful tone. Temporary, irrevocable, limited access. Eleanor tightened her hands on the wheel again. "Not now," she murmured. The words came out before she thought them. Coda glanced forward, ears flicking. She let out a slow breath. The road stretched ahead, unbroken. She focused on that, on the line of it, the way it pulled forward, never asking where she had been. Only where she was going. By the 4th hour, the highway gave way completely. The asphalt remained, but it felt older, narrower. The edges frayed into gravel and dirt. The trees grew closer to the road, branches leaning in as if trying to reclaim it. She passed a small town without slowing. A gas station with 2 pumps, a diner with a flickering sign, a hardware store with faded paint and a bench out front. No one looked up as she drove through. Or if they did, she didn't see it. The sky had shifted by then. The pale morning light had deepened into something softer, cooler. Shadows stretched longer across the road, cutting it into sections of light and dark. Coda finally sat. But he didn't relax. His head remained up, ears forward, gaze fixed on the road ahead. Eleanor noticed that. "He sees something," she said under her breath. She didn't know what, but she felt it too. Not fear. Not quite. Something else. A pull. It wasn't hope. Hope had a shape to it, a direction, a promise. This was different. This was quieter. Like a memory she hadn't realized she still carried. The 5th hour brought the first sign she recognized. It wasn't much. Just a rusted post at the side of the road, the paint long since peeled away. But the shape of it, the angle it leaned, the way it stood slightly apart from the others, she knew it. Her hands tightened again. "Almost," she said. Coda stood. The car slowed as the road turned to packed dirt. Gravel crunched under the tires. The sound was louder here, more present, less hidden. Branches brushed lightly against the sides of the car as the road narrowed further, the trees pressing in. Eleanor leaned forward slightly, peering through the windshield. The light dimmed under the canopy. The air felt thicker, older. She hadn't been here in decades, but the road remembered. It curved the same way, dipped in the same places, held the same quiet. Coda moved closer to the front seat, his body angled, nose lifted. He let out a soft sound, not a bark, not a growl, just a low, uncertain breath. Eleanor felt it in her chest. That same pull again. Stronger now. Not hope, but something that felt like it could become it, if she let it. The trees began to thin. Light broke through ahead. And for the first time since she left the house, Eleanor Whitaker felt something shift. Not behind her, not in what she had lost, but somewhere ahead. Waiting. The road ended without warning, not with a sign, not with a turn. It simply stopped. The packed dirt gave way to a patch of uneven ground where weeds had pushed through the cracks of what used to be a path. Eleanor eased the car forward slowly, the tires crunching over loose stone, then coming to rest beside a sagging wooden post that leaned at an angle no one had bothered to correct. She turned off the engine. Silence settled in around them. Not the quiet of a house, not the quiet of a street. This was something deeper, thicker, the kind of quiet that pressed in from all sides, filled with small sounds you only noticed if you stayed still long enough. Wind moving through branches. A distant creak of wood. Water somewhere, slow and steady. Eleanor didn't move right away. Her hands stayed on the steering wheel. Coda stepped forward between the seats, his front paws landing gently near the console. His breath was warm against her arm. His body was tense again, not afraid, just aware. "We're here," she said softly. It sounded strange out loud. She opened the door. Cold air rushed in, sharper than before. It carried the smell of damp wood, old leaves, and something faintly metallic underneath. Coda jumped down first, landing with a soft thud. He stood still for a moment, head lifted, scanning the tree line. Eleanor stepped out after him. Her boots sank slightly into the ground. The soil was softer than she expected, holding the weight of recent weather. She closed the car door carefully, the sound echoing farther than it should have. Then she looked up. The cottage stood about 20 yards ahead. It was smaller than she remembered, or maybe the world around it had grown. The roof sagged along one side, dipping just enough to make the whole structure look tired. Shingles had gone dark with age, some missing entirely, leaving patches that showed the rough wood beneath. The porch leaned, its railing broken in two places, one board hanging loose like it had tried to leave and failed. Two windows were boarded. The third was cracked, the glass clouded and dull. The door sat slightly off-center in its frame. Everything about it suggested it had been left alone too long. Eleanor took a slow breath. "I can't live here," she said. The words came easily, almost automatically. Then, after a moment, "I have nowhere else." Coda moved forward without waiting. His steps were careful but certain, nose low at first, then lifting as he approached the porch. He didn't hesitate at the broken boards. He stepped around them, choosing his path as if he had been there before. Eleanor followed more slowly. The wood creaked under her weight as she stepped onto the porch. It held, but just barely. She reached out instinctively, touching the railing, feeling the rough grain beneath her fingers. It was colder than she expected. The front door was closed, swollen in its frame. She pressed her hand against it. It didn't move. Of course it didn't. She stepped back. Coda stood to the side, watching her, then the door, then back to her again. "Well," she said quietly, "that's that. Front door sticks." The voice came from behind her. Eleanor turned. A man stood near the edge of the clearing, just beyond the reach of the porch. He hadn't been there a moment ago, or if he had, she hadn't seen him. He was older, late 70s maybe. His shoulders bent slightly forward, not weak, just shaped by years. A wool jacket hung loosely on him, patched at one elbow. His hair was white, wind-tossed, and his hands were rough, the kind that had worked more than they had rested. He held a crowbar. Eleanor stared at him for a second. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't hear me come up," he finished, nodding. "Happens." He walked closer, not hurried, not cautious, just steady. "Knew you'd be coming sooner or later," he said. Eleanor blinked. "You did?" He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. "Whitaker," he said. "Your grandmother was a Vance before that. Cordelia Vance." Eleanor felt something shift in her chest. "Yes." He nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. "I'm Cliff Harlan," he said. "Place down the road. Been here long enough to know who belongs where." Belongs. The word settled strangely. He lifted the crowbar slightly. Door swells shut every winter. Wood shifts. You need this. He didn't wait for her to answer. He climbed the steps with a careful kind of confidence, stepping around the broken boards without looking down. He wedged the crowbar into the seam near the latch, testing the angle. "Stand back," he said. Eleanor did. Coda didn't move. He watched the man closely, body still, eyes tracking every motion. Cliff leaned into the tool. The wood groaned. Once. Twice. On the third pull, something gave. The door cracked open with a sharp sound, releasing a rush of air that had been trapped inside too long. It smelled of dust, of damp, of something older. Cliff stepped back, letting the door swing inward slowly. "There you go," he said. Eleanor didn't move right away. She stood at the threshold, looking into the dim interior. Shapes formed slowly. Furniture under sheets, a narrow hallway, the outline of a table she barely remembered. It didn't feel like a house. Not yet. Just a space that had been waiting. Cliff glanced at her. "You staying?" he asked. She didn't answer immediately. She looked past him, past the porch, past the trees. There was nowhere else. "Yes," she said. He nodded, like that was the only answer that made sense. "All right then." He handed her the crowbar. Metal against her palm, cold, solid. "Pumps out back," he said. "Might still work. Stove inside. If the pipe hasn't collapsed, you can get heat going. Roof's your bigger problem, but it'll hold for now." He stepped down from the porch. "If it doesn't," he added, almost as an afterthought, "you'll hear it before it gives." Eleanor let out a small breath. "I appreciate it," she said. He shrugged. "Cordelia helped my wife once. Long time ago. Figured I'd return the favor." He turned to leave, then paused. "Name's Cliff," he said again. "You need something, you come down the road. Gray house. Can't miss it." Then he walked away. Just like that. Eleanor stood there, the crowbar still in her hand. Coda stepped forward, crossing the threshold without hesitation. He disappeared into the dimness. Eleanor followed. The floor creaked under her weight. The air inside was colder than outside, holding on to the absence of heat like a memory. Dust hung in the light that filtered through the broken window, turning slowly, undisturbed. She stepped into the center of the room and stopped. This was it. This was what was left. Coda moved ahead of her, nose to the floor, then lifting, then turning again. He wasn't wandering. He was searching. Eleanor watched him for a moment. Then she looked around the room again. At the worn edges, the sagging corners, the quiet. "I can't live here," she said again. But this time, she didn't sound as certain. Behind her, the wind moved through the trees, and the door, still loose in its frame, shifted slightly, as if the house itself had taken a breath. Eleanor stood in the center of the room, the crowbar still in her hand. The silence inside the cottage felt different now. Not empty. Not exactly. Just waiting. Coda moved ahead of her, paws soft against the worn boards. He circled once near the far wall, then again, slower this time, nose close to the floor. He paused near the corner, lifting his head slightly, then moved on without making a sound. Eleanor watched him. "You're not sure either," she said quietly. He didn't look at her. The light shifted as a cloud passed overhead. The room dimmed, then brightened again, revealing more of what had been left behind. A table stood crooked against one wall, a chair beside it, one leg shorter than the others, a stove near the center, rusted but intact, its pipe angled upward through the ceiling. She stepped toward it. The metal was cold under her fingers, solid though, heavier than it looked. "Still here," she murmured. She didn't remember the last time she had seen it, or used it. The memory felt distant, like something that belonged to someone else. She set the crowbar down against the wall. Then she moved. Not quickly, not with purpose exactly, but with the kind of quiet motion that comes when there's nothing left to decide. She opened the window. It stuck at first, then gave with a soft crack. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of pine and damp earth. It pushed through the room, lifting dust, shifting something that had been still too long. Coda turned toward the opening, ears lifting, nose catching the wind. For the first time since they arrived, he seemed to relax. Only slightly. But enough. Eleanor stepped back. "All right," she said. The word hung in the air. She didn't know what it meant yet, but she said it anyway. The first night came faster than she expected. The light dropped quickly once the sun slipped behind the trees. The temperature followed. What had been cold became sharp, then biting. Eleanor stood near the stove, looking at it. She had wood. Not much. A broken fence board from near the edge of the clearing. A few pieces of fallen branch she had gathered without thinking. She crouched slowly, her knees protesting the movement. "Let's see," she said under her breath. It took longer than it should have. The matches were old. The paper she found in a drawer didn't catch at first. The wood resisted, damp at the edges. She tried again. And again. Her hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from cold. Coda sat nearby, watching. Not restless now, just present. On the fourth try, something caught. A small flame, then another. The wood shifted, cracked softly, and the fire began to take. Eleanor let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "There," she said. The warmth came slowly. Not enough to fill the room, not yet. But enough. She sat down on the floor, her back against the wall, her hands held out toward the heat. Coda moved closer, lowering himself beside her, his body pressing lightly against her leg. The contact was steady. Real. Outside, the wind picked up. It moved through the trees in long, low waves. The sound wrapped around the cottage, slipping through cracks, brushing against the walls. Inside, the fire burned. Small, but alive. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment. Just a moment. The days settled into a rhythm she didn't plan. They simply formed. Morning came cold. The fire reduced to embers, barely holding on. She learned quickly to stir them back to life, adding small pieces of wood, feeding it carefully until it grew again. Her hands changed first. The skin split at the knuckles, blistered along the palms. The first time she lifted the hatchet, it felt wrong in her grip. Too heavy. Too unfamiliar. Cliff had shown her once. "Let the weight do the work," he'd said, demonstrating with an ease she didn't yet have. She tried to remember. Some days she did. Some days she didn't. The wood still split. Eventually, water came from the pump behind the house. The handle resisted at first, stiff with disuse. She worked it slowly, feeling the strain in her arms. On the 10th pull, something shifted, a low groan, then a thin stream of brown water. She kept going. It cleared. Cold enough to sting her fingers, good enough. Coda followed her everywhere. Not close, not always, but near. He moved along the edges of the clearing, circling the house, pausing at certain points as if listening to something she couldn't hear. At night, he didn't sleep deeply. His head lifted at every sound, every shift of wind, every creak of wood. Sometimes he stood, just stood, looking toward the same side of the house, the same corner. Eleanor noticed, but she didn't ask. There wasn't time. The cold took most of it. So did the work. By the second week, she stopped thinking about the house she had left. Not because it didn't matter, but because there was no room for it here. When the pump froze in the mornings, she had to coax it back to life. When the fire burned too low, she woke shivering and had to build it again in the dark. When the wind came strong, she listened. Not out of fear, but to understand. The cottage spoke in small ways, a shift in the boards, a creak in the rafters, a sound that meant hold, a sound that meant pay attention. She learned slowly. Coda did not stop watching that corner. It was near the fireplace, a section of floor where the boards were darker, slightly warped compared to the rest. He would pause there, sometimes lowering his head, sometimes standing completely still. Once he let out a low sound. Not a growl. Something softer. Uncertain. Eleanor glanced over. "What is it?" she asked. He didn't move. She took a step toward him, then stopped. Her arms ached. Her hands were raw. The cold pressed in harder that day, settling deep into her bones. "Later," she said. He looked at her, then back at the floor. And then slowly, he walked away. The moment passed. But not entirely. That night, the wind came stronger. It pressed against the walls in long, steady bursts. The loose edge of the roof rattled once, then again, a hollow sound that echoed through the space. Eleanor lay on the floor near the stove, wrapped in 2 blankets, listening. Coda didn't lie down. He stood near the center of the room, body angled toward the same corner. The fire flickered. The shadows shifted. And for a moment, just a moment, Eleanor felt it. Not fear. Something else. Something just beneath it. She turned her head slightly, looking toward where Coda stood. The floor was still, the boards unmoving, nothing there. And yet, he didn't move. Neither did she. The wind pressed harder against the walls. The house held. For now. And somewhere inside that quiet, something waited, unnoticed, not yet understood. But there. The wind died sometime before dawn. Eleanor woke to a silence so complete it felt unfamiliar. For a moment, she didn't move. She lay still beneath the blankets, listening for the usual sounds, the shifting boards, the whisper through the cracks, the low breath of the fire. Nothing. Only the faint tick of cooling metal from the stove. She opened her eyes. Gray light had begun to seep through the window. Thin, cold, the kind that didn't warm anything, just revealed it. Coda was not beside her. She pushed herself up slowly, her joints stiff, her hands already aching, before she asked them to do anything. The fire had gone low, just a handful of embers holding on beneath ash. She turned. Coda stood across the room, in the same place, the same corner, the boards near the fireplace. He wasn't pacing, wasn't sniffing. He was standing still, head lowered, eyes fixed. Still at it, she murmured. Her voice sounded smaller in the morning quiet. Coda didn't look at her. He shifted his weight slightly, then placed one paw forward, pressed it down against the floor, lifted it again, pressed again. Testing. Eleanor watched. Something about it felt different this time. Not restless, not curious, certain. She stood, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders, and walked toward him. All right, she said. Let's see. The boards looked the same as they had the day before. Warped, darker than the rest. A thin gap between 2 planks where the wood had pulled apart over time. Nothing unusual. Nothing that should matter. Coda lowered his head and gave a soft, low whine. It wasn't loud, but it held. Eleanor felt it in her chest more than she heard it. You think there's something there? She asked. He tapped the floor again with his paw. Once. Twice. Then he looked at her. Direct. Waiting. Eleanor exhaled slowly. Her hands were already sore, her arms heavy from the day before. The thought of kneeling, of prying, of forcing anything loose, it felt like too much. Later, she said again. The word came out softer this time, less certain. Coda didn't move. His gaze stayed on her, not disobedient, just unwilling to leave it. Eleanor held his eyes for a moment. Then she looked away. We've got other things to do, she said. She turned toward the stove. The moment stretched behind her. Unfinished. The morning passed like the others. Fire first, then water, then wood. Her body moved through it without thinking now. The rhythm had taken hold. There was a kind of mercy in that. Less room for everything else. But the thought stayed. At the edge. Every time she crossed the room, she felt it. That corner. That quiet pull. By midday, the sky had darkened again. Clouds rolled in low, thick, pressing down over the trees, The air shifted, heavier, sharper, a storm coming. Eleanor stood at the window, watching the branches bend. "We'll need more wood," she said. Coda didn't respond. He was back at the spot. This time he didn't just stand. He scratched. Once. The sound was sudden in the quiet room. Wood against claw. Eleanor turned Coda. He scratched again. Harder. The board gave a faint sound. Not a crack. Not a break. Something beneath. She stepped forward quickly. "Stop." Her voice was sharper now. He froze, but he didn't step away. He stood over the spot, breathing heavier, his chest rising and falling faster than before. Eleanor knelt slowly, carefully. Her knees pressed against the cold floor, sending a dull ache up through her legs. She reached out, placing her hand on the board. It felt wrong. Not loose exactly, but not right either. The wood was smoother along the edge, less worn, as if it hadn't been there as long as the others. She ran her fingers along the seam, felt the slight give where it met the next plank. Her breath slowed. Behind her, the wind picked up. It hit the side of the house with a low, steady force. The walls creaked in response, a sound she was beginning to recognize. The house was holding, but barely. Coda let out another low sound. Urgent now. Eleanor glanced at him, then back at the floor. "What are you trying to tell me?" she whispered. The answer didn't come. Not in words, only in the quiet insistence of the dog beside her. She sat back slightly. Her hands rested on her knees. For a moment, she did nothing. The storm outside grew louder, wind pushing through the trees, rattling the loose edge of the roof, brushing against the walls in long, uneven waves. Inside, the fire flickered, the shadows shifted, and the space beneath that board stayed still, waiting. Eleanor pushed herself to her feet. Her body protested the movement, but she ignored it. She crossed the room to where she had left the crowbar. The metal was cold when she picked it up, heavier than she remembered. She stood there for a moment, holding it, listening to the storm, to the house, to the steady breath of the dog beside her. Then she turned, walked back, knelt again. Coda stepped back just enough to give her space, but he didn't leave. She slid the edge of the crowbar into the seam between the boards. It didn't fit at first. She adjusted the angle, tried again. This time it caught. A faint shift, wood against metal. Eleanor paused. Her hands tightened around the handle. The storm pressed harder against the walls. The house creaked. Coda stood perfectly still, watching, waiting. Eleanor took a breath. And for the first time since she arrived, she didn't hesitate. She pushed. The wood resisted at first. A dull strain ran through the crowbar, into her hands, up her arms. For a moment, it felt like nothing would give, that the house would hold its secrets the way it had for years, unmoved by effort, untouched by time. Then something shifted. A small sound. Not loud, but enough. A crack along the seam. Coda leaned forward instantly, his body tightening, breath quickening, his eyes locked onto the spot as if he had been waiting for that exact sound. Eleanor adjusted her grip. "All right," she murmured. She pushed again. This time the board lifted. Not cleanly, not easily, but enough for her to wedge the metal deeper and pull. The wood came free with a low, splintering groan. Cold air rushed up from beneath the floor, different from the air in the room. Heavier. Still. Eleanor set the crowbar aside and used both hands to lift the board fully away. She leaned it carefully against the wall, then sat back on her heels. The opening beneath was narrow, just wide enough to see into. Dark. Coda moved closer, lowering his head toward the gap. He sniffed once, twice, then let out a quiet sound. Not fear, not warning. Recognition. Eleanor felt it again. That shift. That pull. She reached for the lantern near the stove, struck a match, and lit it with steady hands. The flame flickered, then held, casting a warm, unsteady glow. She brought it closer. The light spilled into the opening, revealed something below. Not dirt, not empty space. A compartment. Wooden, built into the foundation. Her breath caught. "Someone put this here," she said softly. Coda remained still beside her, watching. Eleanor lowered the lantern further, angling it so the light reached deeper. There was something inside. Wrapped. Dark cloth tied tightly, edges worn with age. She hesitated, only for a moment. Then she reached down. The space was tighter than it looked. Her arm brushed against rough wood as she stretched her fingers toward the bundle. It was heavier than she expected. Solid. She pulled it up carefully, set it on the floor in front of her. The cloth was stiff with time, edges frayed, the knot pulled tight but not sealed. A faint smell rose from it. Old paper, maybe. Something preserved. Coda sat back slightly, but his eyes never left it. Eleanor untied the knot slowly. Her fingers worked carefully, as if the act itself required respect. The cloth opened. Inside, papers. Not loose. Bound. A stack, tied together with thin twine. And beneath them, a second item. Flat. Wider. She lifted the top bundle first. The paper was yellowed, edges brittle but intact. Handwritten notes filled the pages, the ink faded but legible. Names, dates, figures. A ledger. Eleanor turned one page, then another. Her brow furrowed. "These aren't mine," she said. Of course they weren't. They were older. Much older. She set the ledger aside carefully and reached for the second item. It was wrapped separately. More carefully. The cloth around it was thicker, folded with precision. She opened it. Inside lay a document. Heavier paper. Official. A seal pressed into one corner, faint but visible. Eleanor held it closer to the lantern. Read slowly. Her lips parted slightly. "This," she whispered. The name at the top wasn't Whitaker. It wasn't even the name she had grown up with. It was her grandmother's. Cordelia Vance. Her maiden name. Eleanor turned the page. Another document beneath. Then another. All bearing the same name. All tied to the same land. The same place. This place. Coda shifted again, as if sensing the change in her. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly now. Not from cold. From something else. "These were never filed," she said quietly. Or if they had been, not in the way she had been told. She went back to the ledger, flipped through it more carefully this time. Entries, numbers, references to parcels, notes written in the margins. One phrase repeated more than once, held separately. Eleanor's breath slowed. The storm outside pressed harder against the house, wind rattling the loose edges, but she barely heard it now. Her focus narrowed. On the pages, on the meaning behind them. "This doesn't make sense," she murmured. Everything she had been told, everything she had believed about the property, about what had been lost, what had been sold, what had been absorbed into something else, it didn't line up. Not with this. Not with what she was holding in her hands. Coda stood again. He stepped closer, lowering his head near the open space beneath the floor. He sniffed once more, then lifted his gaze back to her, as if to say, "There's more." Eleanor followed his line of sight, looked into the compartment again. There was nothing else visible. No second bundle, no hidden corner, just the empty wooden space. But it had been enough, more than enough. She sat back slowly. The documents rested in her lap, their weight far greater than paper should carry. "They hid this," she said. The words came out clearer now. Not a question. A realization. Someone had put it there, carefully, deliberately, and left it. Waiting. Coda settled beside her, his body finally relaxing, the tension in his shoulders easing as if a task had been completed. Eleanor looked down at him. "You knew," she said softly. He didn't respond. Didn't need to. She looked back at the papers. At the name. At the lines that no longer matched the story she had been given. The wind outside howled against the walls. The house creaked. But inside, something had shifted. Not in the structure, not in the cold, in the truth. And it was only just beginning to surface. The storm passed sometime in the night. By morning the air had changed, sharper, cleaner, the kind of cold that felt deliberate, as if the land itself had reset. Eleanor sat at the table with the documents spread out in front of her. The lantern had burned low hours ago. Now the pale daylight took its place, spilling through the cracked window, touching the edges of the paper with a dull glow. She hadn't slept much. Not because of the storm. Because of what she had found. Coda lay nearby, his head resting on his paws, eyes half closed. For the first time since they arrived, he seemed at ease. His breathing was slow, steady. Whatever had been pulling at him, it had quieted. Eleanor picked up the main document again. Cordelia Vance. The name still felt unfamiliar in this context. Not because she didn't know it, but because she had never seen it used like this. Not tied to ownership, not to authority. She read the lines again, then again. It didn't change. The land described here, this parcel, the boundaries, the markers, matched what she stood on now. But the language was different, separate, protected. Held outside the standard transfer. Eleanor leaned back slowly. "That's not what they told me," she said under her breath. She had been told everything had been consolidated, merged, simplified. That the cottage had been absorbed into something larger years ago, that it held no independent value. She had believed it, because it had sounded reasonable, because she hadn't had reason to question it. Until now. Coda lifted his head slightly at the sound of her voice, then settled again. Eleanor gathered the papers carefully, stacking them in order. The ledger. The deed, the supporting documents beneath. She wrapped them back in the cloth, not to hide them, just to hold them together. "I need to show someone," she said. The words felt right, necessary. Cliff answered the door on the second knock. He looked the same as the day before, same jacket, same steady posture, as if time moved around him differently. "You're up early," he said. Eleanor held up the bundle slightly. I found something. He didn't ask what, just stepped back. Come in. His house was warmer than hers. Not by much, but enough to notice. A fire burned low in the corner, the room filled with the faint smell of wood smoke and coffee. Eleanor sat at the small table near the window and unwrapped the documents. Cliff didn't interrupt. He leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing as he read. The room stayed quiet for a long time. Finally, he sat back. Well, he said. Eleanor waited. That changes things. How? She asked. Cliff tapped the edge of the document with one finger. Your grandmother didn't let this land go, he said. Not the way people thought. Eleanor's chest tightened slightly. Then why was I told? Because it was easier, he said simply. Easier to say it was all one thing. Easier to move it around that way. Eleanor looked down at the papers. Moved. The word settled differently now. Not accidental. Not unclear. Intentional. She knew, Eleanor said quietly. She knew something like this might happen. Cliff nodded once. Looks that way. A silence followed, not uncomfortable, just heavy with meaning. What do I do? Eleanor asked. Cliff stood. You talk to someone who knows the law better than I do, he said. There's a woman in town. Attorney. Been there a long time. Doesn't miss much. He grabbed his coat. I'll take you. The town sat 30 minutes south. Smaller than the one she had passed before. Quieter. Buildings close together, paint faded by years of weather, not neglect. The attorney's office was above a hardware store. A narrow staircase led up. Inside, the room smelled faintly of paper and dust. Shelves lined the walls, filled with files that had been handled often enough to show it. The woman behind the desk looked up as they entered. Late 50s, maybe. Sharp eyes. No wasted movement. Cliff, she said. What brings you in? He gestured toward Eleanor. She found something you should see. The woman nodded once. Sit. Eleanor placed the documents on the desk, unwrapped them. The attorney leaned forward and began to read. Time slowed. The ticking of a clock somewhere in the room filled the silence between pages. Eleanor watched her face, watched for a reaction. Anything. At first there was none. Then a shift. Small, but real. The woman sat back, looked at Eleanor directly. Where did you get these? In the house, Eleanor said, under the floor. The attorney nodded slowly. That makes sense. Eleanor's breath caught. What does it mean? The woman folded her hands. It means, she said carefully, that the land your cottage sits on was never legally absorbed into any larger estate. Eleanor stared at her. It was held separately, the attorney continued, in a private trust. Your grandmother's name remains tied to it in a way that wasn't transferred. Eleanor felt the room tilt slightly. Then it's still yours, the woman said. The word landed clean, solid, unmistakable. Eleanor didn't speak. For a moment she couldn't. And anyone who assumed otherwise, the attorney added, either didn't know or chose not to look closely. Cliff shifted beside her. Eleanor's hands rested on the edge of the desk, steady, but different now. Can it be challenged? She asked. The attorney shook her head. Not with this, she said, tapping the documents. This is clear. It was hidden well, but it's valid. Hidden well. Eleanor thought of the floorboards, of the careful wrapping, of the way it had waited. All this time, she said softly. The attorney nodded. All this time, weeks passed. Quietly at first, then not so quietly. The roof was repaired, not fully, not perfectly, but enough to hold. Cliff helped. Others came too, people from nearby properties, drawn by word that something had changed. Eleanor didn't ask how they knew. News moved differently out here. The documents were copied, filed properly this time, the land boundaries re-established in official records. What had been uncertain became clear. What had been dismissed became real, and what had been taken from her was no longer the only thing that defined her place. He came late in the afternoon. Eleanor saw the car first. Not familiar. A rental. It pulled slowly up the dirt road, stopping just short of the clearing. Coda stood before she did. His body moved into position without hesitation, stepping forward, placing himself between the house and the approaching figure. Calm. Still. Watching. Eleanor stepped out onto the porch. The air was colder now, winter settling in deeper. The car door opened. Daniel stepped out. He looked smaller somehow. Not physically, but in the way he held himself. He walked forward slowly, stopped at the base of the porch. "Mom," he said. Eleanor didn't answer right away. Coda didn't move. His presence was enough. "I didn't know," Daniel said. The words came quickly, too quickly. "I thought it was all part of the same property. I thought—" Eleanor raised a hand slightly. He stopped. The silence stretched. The wind moved through the trees. Coda stood firm. Between them. Not aggressive. Not threatening. Just unmoving. Eleanor looked at her son. Really looked. At the lines in his face. At the uncertainty. At the space between what he said and what he meant. "I see," she said. Her voice was calm, steady. Daniel shifted his weight. "I just want to talk," he said. Eleanor considered him for a moment. Then she shook her head once. "Not today." Coda didn't move. Daniel stood there a second longer, then nodded, turned, walked back to the car. The engine started. The sound faded down the road. Eleanor remained on the porch. Coda stayed where he was, watching. Until the car was gone. Then, finally, he stepped back, and the space between them closed. The quiet that followed felt different, not heavy, not waiting, just settled. Eleanor stood on the porch a moment longer, her hands resting lightly against the worn railing. The wood was rough beneath her fingers, still uneven where the repair met the old structure. She hadn't sanded it down, didn't want to. Behind her, the door creaked softly as the wind shifted. Coda stepped back beside her, his body brushing lightly against her leg. For the first time since they had arrived weeks ago, there was no tension in him, no alert stiffness, no scanning of the tree line. He simply stood there. Present. Eleanor looked down at him. "You're done, aren't you?" she said quietly. His ears flicked once. That was all. She turned and went inside. The cottage no longer felt like something she had stepped into. It felt occupied. Not filled, not perfect, but lived in. The fire was already going, low and steady. The kettle sat on the stove, beginning to hum as the heat built beneath it. A stack of split wood rested near the wall, uneven but enough to last through the next stretch of cold. Her coat hung near the door. Her boots sat where she had left them. Small things. But they stayed. Eleanor moved through the room slowly. Not because she had to. Because she could. She touched the table as she passed, steadying it slightly where one leg still wobbled. She adjusted the cloth over the window where the crack let in a narrow line of air. She lifted the kettle just before it began to whistle. The motions came naturally now. Not learned. Remembered. Coda lay down near the stove, stretching out fully, his head settling onto his paws. His eyes closed almost immediately. Deep sleep. The kind he hadn't allowed himself before. Eleanor watched him for a moment, then turned back to the room. The boards where she had pried them open were back in place. Not hidden, just set down carefully, the seam still visible if you knew where to look. She did. She always would. The documents were no longer beneath her feet. They sat in a folder on the table now, secured, copied, recorded in places that would not forget them again. What had been hidden was no longer fragile. It had weight now. Recognition, protection. Eleanor poured hot water into a cup. Steam rose slowly, curling into the air before fading. She carried it to the chair by the window and sat. Outside, the trees moved gently in the late afternoon wind. Not the sharp, biting gusts of the storm days before. Just a steady rhythm, branches swaying in long arcs. The sky had softened. Clouds stretched thin across it, letting light through in pale layers. Eleanor took a sip. The warmth spread slowly through her hands. She looked around the room again, at the uneven walls, at the stove, at the small, quiet space that had once seemed impossible. "I can live here," she said. The words didn't surprise her this time. They felt accurate. The repairs came slowly, not all at once, not all perfectly. Cliff showed up most mornings without knocking, tools in hand, offering suggestions more than instructions. Others came when they heard, bringing what they could, wood, nails, small things that made a difference over time. Eleanor didn't ask for help, but she didn't refuse it either. The roof was patched where it needed to be, not replaced entirely, but strong enough to hold against the weather. The porch was straightened. Not perfect, but safe. Inside, the cold spaces grew smaller. The warmth held longer. Coda adjusted too. He no longer circled the house at night, no longer paused at every sound. He moved easily now, resting where he chose, following her out of habit rather than vigilance. Whatever had pulled him to that corner, whatever had kept him on edge, it was gone, or resolved. Eleanor didn't question it. Some things didn't need explaining. Weeks later, the days felt fuller, not busy, but complete. She woke before the light, built the fire, carried water, stepped outside to feel the air before deciding what the day required. The land revealed itself slowly. A path she hadn't noticed at first. A line of stones marking an old boundary. The sound of the creek shifting with the temperature. Each day added something. Each day stayed. Eleanor found herself moving differently. Not careful in the way she had been in the other house. Not quiet out of habit. Just deliberate. Her space. Her pace. Her decisions. Nothing was being arranged around her anymore. Nothing was being decided without her. She sat on the porch one evening as the sun lowered behind the trees. The light stretched long across the clearing, turning the edges of things softer. The repaired roof caught the last of it, the wood glowing faintly before fading back into shadow. Coda lay beside her. Not watching. Not waiting. just there. Eleanor rested her hands in her lap still, comfortable in a way she hadn't been for a long time. She thought of the house she had left, not with anger, not even with regret, just distance. It had been taken from her. Yes. But it hadn't taken everything. Not what mattered, not what remained. She looked out at the land, at the place her grandmother had chosen. Built, protected, hidden even. Not because it was worthless, because it wasn't. Because it needed to wait. For someone who would see it. Eleanor let out a slow breath. The air moved easily now. No resistance, no weight behind it. Just space. Cottage shifted slightly, pressing his shoulder into her leg. She rested her hand against him. Warm, steady, real. The wind moved through the trees again, softer this time, carrying the faint scent of pine and earth. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again. The light was fading, but the house behind her held. The fire inside, ready, and the ground beneath her feet, unmoved. Some people don't take everything from you. They just hope you won't look closely at what remains. But truth has a way of waiting. Quietly. Patiently. Especially in places built by those who refuse to be forgotten. Patiently. Especially in places built by those who refused to be forgotten.
Eleanor sat there as the last light slipped off the roof and settled into the trees, her hand resting on Coda's back, feeling the slow rise and fall of his breath. The house didn't feel empty anymore. It didn't feel like something she had been sent to. It felt like something that had been kept. On those years, she had believed that words in front of her, what people told her, what sounded reasonable, practical, safe. She never thought to look underneath, never thought something important would be hidden, not lost. Koda had, not because he understood documents or name or ownership, just because something didn't feel right, and he stayed with it until it revealed itself. Eleanor looked out across the land again, the quiet settling deeper now, not heavy, just steady, and she wondered, not for the first time, how many things in her life had she worked best simply because no one told her to stop and look.